because they've been a driver of economic growth. They've had 10% growth rate for 30 years. And, exponential growth means that doubles every 7 years. So the first 7 years it doubles. The next 7 years and 14 years, you're talking about 4 times double the size. So 14 years, you're doubling the size. 21 years, you're actually looking at 4 times the size of the economies. So these are major moves. Yet China is now going into a recessionary period, and with their COVID policies, it's not going to be ending anytime soon. They also have a huge real estate bubble. They've got entire cities that have been built where basically nobody lives there, and some of these buildings are starting to fall down. Also, the biggest company, the company with the biggest debt in the world is Evergrande. They started to default several months ago. Again, repercussions around, and we think, oh, it's just business. It doesn't have anything to do with international relations. Yet, what ends up happening is they snowball into each other and they start to collide. That means that the Chinese economy starts to get weaker. They have less power. There's also pressure from Xi Jinping to keep that economy expanding, so it legitimizes his leadership, and nationalism could rise again. And it did rise with Taiwan. So Taiwan is this little tiny place. I've been to Taiwan a few times. It's wonderful, it's lovely, but it's not that big. And yet that's a breakaway province from China. It goes back to 1949. And that's one of the things that Xi Jinping wants, is to get China back. Again, sitting in, if you're sitting in South Sea in Nairobi, does it really matter? It actually does, because if there's conflict there, the reverberations go all around the globe. So it is important to see that. Whether he will or he won't invade is hard to say. But yesterday I had a nice conversation with a student from Hong Kong. And, Hong Kong is a great example of one of those broken promises by the Chinese government. So Taiwan is in no hurry to rejoin. Again, these are localized things that we should be aware of for the global implications for all of us. And you can see this growth of China, and now it's stopped. Well, things like cement, right? So raw materials coming from East Africa. If you're not just in Kenya, but your business is you're doing business all over East Africa, it's really important to be aware of that. The other thing is what happens with some of the loans when the One Belt, One Road, which we're all familiar with, the Mombasa to Nairobi train, the bridges, all of that. If the Chinese government needs allies against, remember that Mackinder theory, against others, including the United States, those soft loans become very hard and they become more difficult to pay back. One of the best examples of the OBOR that went wrong was in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka had borrowed quite a lot of money to build a port just north of the capital, and the president pocketed quite a lot of cash, did quite well personally. Then that loan became a hard loan. What kind of hard loan did that mean? Well, when we look at it, we think One Belt, One Road. We are, China's benevolent, they're very helpful. Yet, just earlier this year, Sri Lanka went bankrupt. There was a people power movement that literally chased the prime minister. The prime minister got on an airplane and went to the Maldives. This is a result of soft loans going hard. So, I took these photos, by the way, in Dubai the last time I was in Kenya, because Standard Chartered is a traditional British bank, but has huge interests all over China, became a Chinese bank. And, again, we see this, it's really, very benevolent and very helpful. And it's not, because countries have their own interests at heart. Countries will always go back to their own citizens for their, for their own survival. So Hong Kong Island was about 273,000 acres, 3 times the size of Nauru, 10 times larger than Gibraltar. Now, in Colombo, I did say north. It's actually south of Colombo. I haven't been. I have students from Sri Lanka, though. And this particular port was modeled on Hong Kong. Chinese government had kept saying that the British government, it was an unequal treaty. They were treated very poorly, and they still have a lot of grievances. Even in the Chinese school books, they start talking about, well, Hong Kong really wasn't British, it was only Chinese, and so on. Very propaganda driven, yet the same model they've applied to Sri Lanka. The result is the Sri Lankan economy contracting, people don't have money, people don't have food, and there's no power for much of the day, and they chase the government out. Things that we need to be very much aware of when we get these so-called soft loans. Again, I've lived in Hong Kong, I've traveled through China, I love Chinese people and food and culture, but the government can be a very dangerous government. So I'm not trying to say anything against Chinese as a whole, but just something that Kenya needs to be aware of, and we need to be aware of as leaders and managers on how are we going to deal with some of these changes, because this change was rather dramatic. And right now, what the Chinese government is doing, if you remember, America has 800 military bases around the world. China, for the longest time, said we have none. First one was in Djibouti. Now they're starting to expand. Of course, they have the one in Sri Lanka. They're building others on fake islands or built-up islands in the South China Sea. So China is rapidly growing. And one of the dangers for sovereign countries, including many within the African continent, are to get this so-called help and soft loans from the Chinese government. When that happens, we need to start to think about where do we stand, and we need to sort of make our voice known, because the OBOR has been in place only 7 years. Actually, sorry, that was 2. So about 9 years now. But, and it's been growing and growing. Although now with the economy in China basically stopping, there's going to be some new initiatives. However, the Chinese government has indicated they would like to send 100 million, this was a small white paper done, 100 million Chinese all over the African subcontinent, all over, actually, I think it was all over all 54 countries within Africa. So they had a policy of exporting labor and having that labor overseas to solidify their own national interests. Something that we need to be aware of, which brings us to the next, there's a lot of competition, right? So within Japan, we have what's called TICAD, which is where we start to look at African development, and that includes, and it's happened in Kenya a number of times, this conference, but this is just part of this competition. And there's the Peloponnesian War, so 2,300 years ago. It was called Thucydides' trap. This Thucydides' trap basically is where an upcoming power and an established power end up fighting, because the established power expects the upcoming power to have a fight. Neither one of them really wanted to fight, but it ends up happening. Again, something that we need to be quite aware of in Kenya. And will it happen? It's still something I certainly pray and hope it doesn't happen, but it's something that could happen. Leadership in America, right? You've got Biden, right? President Biden, who's the oldest president in the history of the United States, and Trump. Trump looks like he might make a comeback. So these are things that we need to be aware of, because it has such an impact on our daily lives and where we are going. Again, you can see where these things are going and headed towards. So there are ways to avoid the Thucydides trap, but right now the number one focus is on Russia. Yet this week, Xi Jinping is meeting with Vladimir Putin. So they're getting together and they're having meetings. Others who are having meetings with them, with Putin, who else is meeting with Putin? Well, let's take a look at the Ukraine attack, right? So when this happened in February, there were pro-Russia stances, right? Then there were anti, right, including Japan and Kenya, both blue, but look at how many yellows there are, right? So, there's quite a lot of yellow there, and that's a neutral stance. That includes the two most populous countries in the world, China and India. So, because strategically, can they really break from Russia with the oil and energy that they need? Russia is a huge exporter of oil, huge exporter of of other natural resources. So, is it something that they can or cannot do? Very challenging, very difficult, but something that can be very difficult for all of us, and it's affecting us now. One of the problems is the importing of food from Ukraine. I think it's averted for Kenya, but I was watching it so concerned earlier this year because these are supply chain issues that really do attack us. And we've got the rise again, right? So we've got India and China and Russia. And are they all terrible? I mean, are they all terrible? I don't know. I mean, I looked at it from the Russian perspective. I'm Canadian. People think that I'm I'm anti-war. Let me just make that very clear. But if you look at Kiev and you look at Kharkiv, those cities within Ukraine are far east of Moscow, right? I mean, they're just the edge of Ukraine is east of Moscow. Moscow did not want Ukraine joining NATO. And by the way, Putin had asked to join NATO. He had been part of the G8. We kicked him out. So I can't say that he's a good guy, but I also can't say that we need to condemn absolutely everything. And these guys are monsters. So one of the things that we are heading into again is this Kindleberger trap. Kindleberger trap means that there is no policeman. And that's where you hear more and more of that now, where the powerful country just does what they want to the less powerful. They ignore the courts. They ignore the international courts. They ignore the United Nations, and they just do what they want. Very dangerous, because that's what it was in the 1930s, and we all know the result of that. Kenya had sent tens of thousands of soldiers to fight for the British Empire, and so did Canada. So once that happens, it can be very, very, very difficult. Getting back to what I'd heard earlier from Dr. Agundo, things that we can think about though, and we need to sort of keep an eye on all of that, and then try to think about how we as humans and as ourselves as leaders and managers, how can we sort of deal with some of this stuff? Think about some of the things that we should be aspiring to, what the new government of Kenya should be aspiring to, and how we can sort of work together for some of these sustainable things. Because we have some real challenges, right? We've got population threats, we've got pressures, lots of population pressures. This world will hit a new number this year. We'll hit 8 billion people. This fall in 2022, Kenya continues to grow. So we've got some real things, but we also have real energy pressures. And we'll see that more and more as time goes on. And as you see this big picture and you see the global picture, think about what you can do and how can you do something for yourself? Because I think it's important. I'm just going to finish the last couple of minutes. I've got about 3 minutes left. So personal responsibility is something I want everyone to think about at this conference. And how can we do this? So in other words, I'd like you all during this weekend to really think about your own personal development. Don't leave it to chance. Take responsibility. The Bible in Proverbs says, all hard work brings a profit, but mere talk only leads to poverty. So, take personal responsibility. Think about what you're doing. Have self-control, your values. This all fits in with self-management and self-leadership. And aspire to bigger things. The Old Testament talks about scapegoats, where we put all the problems onto the head of the goat and then release the goat. So our troubles go with it, the scapegoating. Don't do that. Take responsibility. Take personal responsibility for your own effects in life. Don't blame somebody else. Take it for yourself. And the way to do that is by learning more, being aware of your environment from a global all the way down to a personal. Because nobody really will follow a leader who's unorganized or unable to lead themselves. So remove have to from your vocabulary and remove cannot, because there's nothing that you have to do. You don't have to get up in the morning, but you do it because you choose to do it. And You cannot, maybe some things we cannot do, but try to remove that word from your vocabulary. Take the credit and the blame for your life, but most importantly, take the credit. So that's what I'd like to leave you with today, because, you know, things always seem impossible until it's done. That's what Nelson Mandela had said. So again, as we sort of look at our own self and as we come through a post-COVID world, I'd like us all to be really kind of thinking about some of those things. By the way, many of these ideas that came to me were from Dr. Dennis Waitley, who said that success is almost totally dependent upon drive and persistence, the extra energy required to make another effort or try another approach, which is the secret of winning. Okay, so and I found that, and I just have to make one more comment. My professor, thank you very much, Professor Awar, for mentioning Grapes Yard in Corogocho. So this year has been another great year for my my own personal achievements. But I didn't actually do very much, but just supporting an NGO in the slums of Kenya, and you know, we can really see differences. So that's something that I've also taken on. I mean, I don't have a lot of time in the day, but I certainly have done that. I've had my son involved, raising money for basketball courts. We've raised money for libraries and so on. Again, personal responsibility and looking at what I can do in my own small way to help change the world as we look at the world in a bigger way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Miller. I think you've taken the right time. You are to finish at 11. I think we still have, you had finished at 11. We are at 10:56, so there's still some 4 minutes. Now, that was a very good presentation from Professor Miller. And just a recap, a second. Leadership challenges in a post-COVID world. And I think 3 key things that came out from his presentation is the fact that we need to understand, for us to understand what is happening today, we must understand the past. I think he's talked about understanding global events. I think he's moved around issues in China, Ukraine, Pakistan, India, the Russia-Ukraine war, or conflict and its impact on the global economy. And I think he has also pointed out about the global supply chains and its disruptions and how that has impacted negatively on a lot of economies globally. He's also told us to be aware of India and China as emerging global economies. Indeed, there's a last week World Bank report in which India is now the 5th largest global economy in the world, having outplaced United Kingdom, which is now at number 6. So indeed, India and China are to be watched globally. So that was a good presentation from Professor Miller, who is a full professor at a university in Japan. Thank you very much. I now have the pleasure of inviting our next guest, and that is Dr. Edward Maimbe.
Recording stopped.
He has a very rich CV, which I think you'll find online and read later. I'll only give a highlight of his CV because we might take almost 1 hour reading the whole CV. So Dr. Edward Maimbe is a research assistant professor and research capacity building director at the Rehabilitation and Training Center, and this is in the USA. He is a co-principal investigator of several federally funded research projects, and I think there are several projects here he's mentioned where he's a co-investigator. He'll tell us about them. He's also faculty at a college of education in Oregon State University, and that is in the USA. He holds a BA in Sociology and Literature from the University of Nairobi, as well as a diploma in healthcare management from the Kenya Institute of Management. He also holds a bachelor's degree in rehabilitation counseling from Bowling Green State University in the US, as well as a PhD in rehabilitation education from the University of Arizona. and that's also in the USA. A couple of things also to note about our speaker is that he's a certified rehabilitation counselor and licensed drug and alcohol counselor. And he was also a past chair of Langston University Faculty Senate, that is from 2020 to 2021. Also, just a few things to notice is that he's a member of the National Council of Rehabilitation Education, Kenya Studies and Scholars Association, the National Association of Multicultural Rehabilitation Concerns, among others. He is married, he has 3 children, and he'll tell us about the rest. So welcome, Dr. Edward Maimbe.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Yes, thank you very much. I'm very, very excited to be here. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm not sure that my CV is that long, but thank you very much. So to begin, Vice Chancellor, Professor Washington Okeyo, Deputy Vice Chancellor, university administrators, educators, and distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. As you have already heard, my name is Dr. Edward Maimbe. I currently serve as Capacity Building Director and a Research Associate Professor at the Capacity Building, Director for Langston Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Research and Capacity Building for Minority Entities in the USA. Dr. Cody Moore, who is our Research Director, he was supposed to come, but because of unavoidable circumstances, he could not make it here. So he sent his greetings. And also, I'm really excited to be here today. And here, this is my country. So it's good to be back home. This conference, whose theme is Redefining Organizational Leadership and Management towards Post-COVID-19 Pandemic, is very, very important to all of us. But before I proceed, allow me to sincerely thank Professor Washington Okeyo, the Vice Chancellor, the Management University of Africa, for asking me to be your keynote speaker. So I want to thank you very much for that. Many thanks to all the committee members that, who have been working so hard organizing this conference. I've had the privilege to meet with Dr. Machoka and talk over the phone for several hours, as he was helping me to prepare for this conference. And I want to also say some special thanks to Langston University for sponsoring my travel. I want to thank all conference presenters and participants, those attending in person and virtually. So I'm just so glad that all of you could join this important conference. I want to thank the Management University of Africa for being such an outstanding host. Please give a big round of applause to yourselves. Yes, I can see, before I proceed, I've seen Professor Micheka, so I want to recognize him. Thank you. Professor Micheka is my mentor and a friend. For those of you who know him, he is the founding Vice Chancellor of Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, and he is a highly respected higher education leader, not only in Kenya, but also globally. Professor Micheka is also a member of the KIM Governing Council, who is a sponsor of the Management University of Africa. So thank you. Yeah, I was accompanied here by my brother, Godfrey Manyibe, who is a senior lecturer at the Kenya School of Government, and Lilian Ondeki, and Lydian Ondieki, who is the coordinator, Management, University of Africa, AIM branch. So thank you all. So I think it's important to take a minute and just think about COVID-19, okay? The pandemic. And so I was asked to speak about higher education, management, and leadership in COVID-19 era. And I'm sure all of us here have been affected by COVID-19 one way or another. So when we talk about COVID-19, it's not something that's new to us, but it's something that we don't understand. So we'll talk about that later, and mostly I'll be talking in the context of the lessons learned. So in the forward of this conference, when I saw the forward, normally I want to look at the program, and then I realized in the forward of this conference that we are reminded that conferences are forums for dissemination of academic research findings and a cross-pollination or fertilization of ideas. And then I realized that the conferences are also important for networking and developing professional and personal relationships. In fact, some studies have indicated that networks can be more important than personal attributes. For example, academic qualifications, all those. That if you have close connections, close networks, if you are close to the centers that make decisions, that's really beneficial. If you have access, for example, to COVID information, you are more likely to make good decisions. Or if you are close to doctors who understand what COVID is, then they share that information with you, you are more likely to make a better decision than somebody who has maybe a degree but does not have really a connection to people who understand what that COVID-19 is. So I will encourage all of us, when we have time, just take some moment, get to know each other, get some connections, exchange emails, exchange some phones, because you never know after today where those connections might take you. So as we all know, the last 2+ years have been unique and unprecedented. The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted our way of life. Some people call it that it has collapsed our way of life. The higher education landscape is one of those ecosystems that has been disrupted in ways that we never imagined. So the challenges the pandemic presents higher education leaders are many, complex, and interrelated. Above all, from my perspective, I think these challenges provide us, the education leaders, managers, with an opportunity to apply our individual and the collective talents to innovatively tackle them and be prepared to confront crises of the future. So it's not just about what we can do now, it's how can we use the lessons of today to be prepared for tomorrow. So for now, I would like us to focus on some lessons, some six lessons that we have learned, at least from my perspective, from COVID-19, and how they are relevant to higher education, management, and leadership. So these lessons are understanding the changing landscape in higher education, prioritizing safety, application of universal design in higher education ecosystem, developing robust and resilient online systems, and developing a culture of research and innovation. So if we can start from understanding the changing landscape in higher education. Think about Kenya, for instance, 40 years ago, or at the time of independence. How many universities did we have? Think about the United States, since it is independence. How many universities? And think about today. There are numerous, thousands of universities. In some cases, some universities are just teaching theology or some aspect. Then they expanded, providing, offering different degrees, attracting so many people. So it's good to understand this changing landscape in the COVID-19 context so that we can really understand how to respond. So we know that before COVID-19, higher education, of course, was already changing rapidly. And COVID-19 only magnified and accelerated the change. For those who were not prepared, the change almost swept us. It was like a kind of a tsunami. But for those who were prepared for these changes, they made some good adjustments. Like in the USA, higher education in Africa is also changing rapidly. So as I mentioned, there's so much that has happened. As of 2020, there were about 64 universities in Kenya. So I stand corrected, but they were about that. That's why you say what? Approximately. Okay? And that's huge. Think about that in 1963 when we had one university. Let's think about the demographics of the students, faculty, and the staff. The change. At the beginning, you went to university, most likely you'll see men occupying. They were the almost professors. Then slowly women started participating, becoming faculty, lecturers. Now we have people coming from other countries, international faculty, and all these things. So for us to really understand how to respond effectively to COVID-19 challenges, we have to understand the composition of the community of scholars. If we don't understand, then we cannot tailor our response to individuals and, of course, to the collective. So we have to think about them. Because if we just think that one response fits all, and then we just use one mechanism to deal with all situations or one strategy to deal with one, we are going to fail. If we are developing policies at the university level, even at the country level, whichever level, the county level, if we develop them without thinking about the composition of the population, then we are going to make a huge mistake. And then we invest a lot in some responses that undermine the purpose of those responses. So we have to understand. So I want us to think about that. Here, for example, here at Management University of Africa, what's the student body? When you go to the University of Nairobi, when I go to the University of Langston, always we are thinking, how many international students do we have? From which country? How many the students we call traditional students do we have? How many non-traditional students do we have? What are their qualifications? When they came in, when they exit, what kind of qualification did they have? Where do they get employment, for instance? And then how can we use all this information to make decisions? So this is very important in terms of understanding our responses. So from my experience dealing with COVID-19 as a faculty member and as an administrator, and as you heard, I was the chair of our faculty senate when COVID-19 really started. And so all these we realized during my experiences that understanding who we are at the university level understanding what's changing, how the demographics of the students are changing, what the demographics of the faculty are changing, is very, very important for us to be able to develop COVID-19 responses. So, in this regard, I would suggest that university leaders and managers must find innovative ways, such as creating interdisciplinary research teams and establishing diversity management teams to be better prepared to respond to the effects of the pandemic. And of course, we know there are other emerging crises. We have heard of the monkeypox. We don't know what will come next. We know in Afghanistan, for example, when the USA and its allies withdrew and it collapsed, you know what that meant. We have to be prepared for those kind of events because I know some of us here coming from different parts of the world, so we have different crises that we have to deal with, and we have to contextualize that. Second, I want us to focus on what COVID-19 has taught us in terms of safety. Langston University identified safety of the students, of the faculty, and the staff as the #1 priority. And of course, our customers, those people coming in, whether it's parents, whether it's our sponsors, those who provide scholarships, whether it is community providers where our students do internships. All this, we have to understand who are our partners. And then how do we work together to develop, to make sure that everybody is safe. But of course, we have to make sure that we draw from them, from their experiences, to involve them. So when a disaster strikes, nothing really, from my perspective, nothing matters more than ensuring the safety of everyone. At the family level, we know that if your child gets sick, what do? Do you go to work or you take your child to the hospital? So the same thing with the university. When the students, they are affected by COVID, other things might stop so that you can say, how do we make that these students is taken care of? How do we make sure that our faculty is taken care of? How do we make sure that our staff member is taken care of? So it's the same thing, the same principle really. And I have some experience with COVID-19, very, very, very personal. My wife was diagnosed with COVID-19. She had some really bad symptoms, but of course, she recovered very quickly because she had already, she had COVID vaccine. She was vaccinated. So it was managed, but it was bad. Everybody was scared. What do we do with, the kids, myself? Do we stay somewhere far away from her? How close should we be? All those kind of things. Then after a few weeks, my son was also, at that time he was 6 years. Then he became sick. Going to the hospital, they said he has COVID. So what do we do? Take him home? They said nothing we can do, just take him home, do APCD. But really, what that taught us was always, because we were thinking about safety of everyone, including the one who is sick. Safety, everything is about safety. So, so I think from what I've seen is that we have, when there's a crisis, especially a healthy emergency, a public health emergency, safety becomes #1. So we have to bring all the systems, or everybody concerned, and say, okay, what do we need to do? How do we respond? So at Langston University, as I said, the president identified safety as #1 concern. He created teams. One was a policy team consisting of the president, the vice president for academic and other vice presidents, and the deans of students, what was called the executive policy team. And then he created another team, which was called Emergence Leadership Team. And because of my position as the chair of the faculty at that time, I was a member of this Emergence Leadership Team. So I represented the faculty in that particular team, making sure that the faculty's perspectives, the voice of the faculty was taken into account when making decisions related to COVID-19 and, of course, the safety of the university community. So, again, from that, I learned three things that I think are relevant to us participants in this conference. Number one, it is critically, and I cannot emphasize that enough from my perspective, to prioritize the safety of the university community during crisis. Second, leaders and managers should adapt, adjust, and respond to crisis with innovation and emotional intelligence. And I want to really focus on that emotional intelligence part. There's a lot of research about emotional intelligence. If you have not done a test, if you have not tested your emotional intelligence, I would recommend that you do that and test your emotional intelligence, because it can give you some insight on how you make decisions and how you relate with people and all those there's so many things to look at. So I would encourage that you do that, because then it helps you kind of do some self-evaluation, how you make decisions, whether they are informed by emotional intelligence. And by that I mean, emotional intelligence helps us to treat people with compassion. It helps us to empathize with people, to put ourselves in the people's shoes, and then start seeing the world through their eyes, through their lenses. But without emotional intelligence, sometimes we might be disconnected from them and make decisions that affect people in a way that really was not our intention. But if you have put yourself in that situation, then you are going. So as leaders, as educators, and I'm saying leaders because I know everybody's a leader and everybody's a manager. But sometimes you are all changed. Sometimes you are more of a manager than a leader. Sometimes you are more of a leader than a manager, depending on which hat you are wearing at any particular time, because all of us wear different hats. Now I'm speaking here today. The next time I'm sitting there, I'm listening. So those kind of changes, our roles change so rapidly within a very short time. So I'm seeing all of us here as leaders and managers in higher ed. So it's important that we understand. The last one, the third point I think, which is very important, is developing and consistently implementing effective communication with all university stakeholders. It is very important. I cannot again overstress the importance of communication, especially at the university level. Students, they're always having unanswered questions. Sometimes you feel like you have answered the question, but then they ask the same question in a different way. So you say, oh, I thought I already communicated this. I thought I sent an email. I thought, we have a website where you can get this information. Again, if you hear me, I'm saying I thought. So I'm thinking from my perspective, and I'm not thinking from the perspective of the person receiving the information. So, but once we think about how people receive information and how we communicate, then we are able to develop communications channels that are more effective. I want to, for example, I know my students. This morning when I woke up, I had to go check my emails, and then I had to go to our learning system and see whether they have sent them, because sometimes they send emails to my personal email, sometimes to my university email, sometimes through the learning management system. Even if I've said that let's communicate through this line, but students don't always follow the instruction. So it's me to think about them, understand them, so that I can serve them better. So I don't have to say, okay, if you didn't send email to my university email, then I'm not going to respond. No, I have to check all ways they communicate to me so that I can meet their needs. Again, students are my customers. If I don't treat them as my customers, I'm going to lose my job. They're the most important. They pay school fees. That's how I get paid. Without students, we cannot be, faculty. So I'm always thinking of students as my customers. So I think communication, I realize, especially when there's an emergency, when people don't have information, when people are so uncertain about things, when people are so suspicious, when there's a lot of miscommunication, then we need to improve on that aspect. So I think I need to move a little bit faster. How many minutes do I have? 1 minute? Okay. How many? 5. Okay. Okay, the third one is what I think is also very important is that the application of universal design in the higher education system. How we create learning environment. Universal design is really about how we create our environments. And in this context, I'm talking about how we create our learning environments. When we use universal design standards to create environment, then we ensure that it helps us to ensure that everybody has access, everybody is accommodated. Okay? So I think it's very important for us to be able to design our environments, thinking about those who are environments I met, people with disabilities. I come from the disability field. And most cases, really, if you think about the way our buildings are designed, our roads are designed, they are not designed for people with disabilities in mind. The universities must lead, because this is where education is, this is where we generate ideas. They must lead in terms of making that we accommodate students, but applying universal design will help us really make sure that everybody is taken care of. Universal design is not about just individuals, it's about everybody. Old people, young people, people who can read, people who can't read, all those kind of people. So going forward, higher education leaders have a critical role of ensuring that the university ecosystem is designed to meet the needs of all who wish to use it. Well-designed and implemented education environments are key to achieving universal education for all, improving learning outcomes, increasing positive college experiences, and reducing costs, especially for vulnerable groups such as the poor, women, and people with disabilities whose needs might be different or complex and sometimes interrelated. Number 4, we now understand from COVID-19 the importance of developing robust and resilient online systems. And I want to really applaud the Management University of Africa for really leading in online education, especially in this field. So we have a lot to learn from them and to see what they're doing right, learn from their experiences, and then use those experiences in our own context. So the university has done very well in terms of leading in that area. So online systems, I know in Africa, I've talked with a number of faculty members, students. Some universities did a very good job. Some universities must do a catch-up kind of. Some universities are investing a lot of money in that. Some universities are not doing the same. But with COVID-19, we have no choice, okay? COVID-19, for those who did not invest in these types of platforms, they found themselves in a very, very difficult situations. So forward thinking, let's think about those systems and how we can make them even user-friendly. And number 5 is that the importance of developing a culture of research and innovation. We know that in the USA, I talk about minority serving institutions, and I want to help explain what they are, because some of you might not understand. The university, we have what we call predominantly white universities, okay? Some universities, almost 90% of the student body are white. 90% of the faculty are white. So those are universities traditionally called. And if those of you know the history of the USA, sometime back, minorities were not supposed to mix with whites. So there was, there were those institutions for whites and the institutions for minorities, especially blacks. So the university I teach is called a historically black universal college, meaning that it was started because blacks would not be allowed to go to white institutions, and so the blacks had to start their own universities to cater for their own educational needs. But now we have other minority-serving institutions, for example, those serving predominantly Hispanics or Latino, those serving predominantly Native Americans. So when I talk about minority-serving institutions, please understand that in that context. So minority-serving institutions are generally, compared to predominantly institutions, again this generally, are under-resourced, okay, when you compare those two. And I think quite a number of universities in Kenya, in Africa, share some aspects of those institutions. So there's something that we can learn from each other. So what these institutions are doing is that they are trying originally they were meant to just focus on teaching, okay, students and service provision. They were not so much into research, but now that is changing. And they are developing a culture of research. And our center, the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center that I talked about, the RRTC, was funded mainly to help these institutions develop a culture of research. So we developed some capacity building models, research capacity models, mentorship models, and we are implementing these models at 5 institutions: 2 historical black colleges and universities, 2 Hispanic institutions, and 1 tribal college and university. And we have implemented these models, we have evaluated, and again we are implementing those models again, and we will evaluate it, test it, and scale it up, and then see whether these models can be used to help these institutions develop their culture, their research capacity. So far, these models have shown a lot of promise, and that's what we continuously do. So when I talked about RRTC, my capacity building director, that's how it comes in, because then that's my function to make sure that we are doing our work well. And as I said, Dr. Moore is our research director and the principal investigator, and I'm a co-PR. So what this has really told us, that generally, think about university in Africa, we've been consuming knowledge, okay? Most cases, consumption. When we do research, we go do literature review. Most cases, maybe not doing primary research. The books that we use sometimes are done in the West, okay? By Westerners, some people who don't have really any experience about Africa, and we use them in the classrooms. I remember when I was in the University of Nairobi during my undergraduate, I did a study as part of my literature class, and I went to some schools here in Nairobi to see what kind of books, literature, from a literature perspective, what kind of books they were reading. And I looked at the images and all this, and I realized people were reading like Cinderella stories, things talking about snow. We don't have a lot of snow here. We don't know about the Queen, all those, even the songs that we sing for our kids. And I realized how education can alienate us from our environment. But the same thing even in higher education. Back in the USA, some of the books we do, most they are not written by minorities. They are written by mostly male and all those Anglos from Anglo-Saxon heritage. So what I'm trying to say is that as universities here in Africa and minority-serving institutions, we have to start becoming producers, not just consumers of knowledge, producers of knowledge. So let me go quick, and I'm not going to stress on that. So let's think about that, how we can develop that culture of knowledge. But I want to say something quickly about a culture of research and innovation in the context of COVID-19. Think about the information that we are using to address COVID-19. Who has generated that information? The universities that were well prepared, the university where research is stressed. We are using that information to respond to COVID-19. They did rapid research. Yeah, if you look at the literature, they were called rapid tests, rapid, and then produce some information, inform governments what to do. So they were informed, telling the government, this is what you need based on our research. Based on our research, you need to wear a mask. Based on our research. So for us, we were kind of waiting to see what the information is about. I'm not saying there's no research being done. Okay? Don't get me wrong. I know we are doing some good research, but we need to really move towards doing a lot of that and more quality research that can inform interventions, practices, can inform the development of new technologies that we can use to more innovatively respond to this kind of emergencies. And then, so what's the way forward, having said that? I think the science about COVID-19 is still evolving. It's at its infancy stage. We don't know much about it. I don't know how many of you know about long COVID syndrome. Okay? The syndrome that those people who get COVID-19, then they start experiencing those symptoms for a long period of time, even after they have been declared COVID-free. Sometimes you feel good, and after 2 months, you have these symptoms. So it's called long COVID. How are we going to respond to them? What if we have students who have long COVID, and they come to you and they say I have these symptoms, and then you say, no, you look all right. Okay? Your staff, a faculty member comes, I can't come to work because I have these symptoms, same symptoms I had, like when I had COVID-19. How do you respond as a reader? Are you going to tell him, okay, you need to take care of yourself? Are you going to develop some policies around long COVID-19 syndrome? What are we going to do? We need to think about these things. So that's one thing I think we need to be thinking about, especially in higher education. In the USA, already long COVID-19 has been, the government decided that people with long COVID-19 can receive disability benefits. Okay? They can receive disability benefits. What about here in Kenya and other parts of the world? Are they responding the same? So let's think about that. I think also we must, based on some of these lessons, we must be prepared for future disruptions. Okay? Nobody knew about COVID-19, but now we have to think about what about the future? What disruption might come? What about the collapse of the internet? What if that happens? What will we do with students who are learning using online platforms? Are we going to bring them back to universities? Do we have enough classrooms? And I was thinking when those days people were running under the trees, should we build more trees, plant more trees so that if that happens, we can have, somewhere. Sometimes these things might look so far-fetched, but then when reality comes, so we have to think really about those future disruptions. So I think mine is to challenge us to reimagine ways universities can adapt if we experience major online disruptions also. So once again, because of time, I wanted to take this time to once again express my deepest appreciation to Professor Washington for inviting me here, for the Management University of Africa for hosting us, and doing this wonderful work that you are doing and leading, helping us really talk about this thing, tackle and think more critically about COVID-19 and its effect and how we can respond. Again, thank you all for listening to me. And I hope that we'll continue with this conversation even beyond this conference. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Maimbe, for that wonderful presentation. He's given us a presentation on higher education, management, and leadership in COVID-19 era. A 1-second recap on what he's just talked about. He started by reminding us about the purpose of conferences and the need for networking, the need for sharing ideas, and the need for collaborations and partnerships that are very crucial in making better decisions in management and leadership. He's gone ahead to tell us about lessons learned from COVID. He actually highlighted about 6 lessons that he, as an administrator at a university in the US, learned about COVID and its relevance to higher education. But of importance from a personal perspective are the models he talked about, the models of developing research capacity that he's already implementing in some, he calls them minority university in the US. I'm wondering, Dr. Maimbe, whether MUA can also benefit from these models, because you realize research is the only way out for universities in Africa to get out of these cash flow issues. So maybe that is a conversation that we will carry out after this conference. But thank you very much for your presentation. And as he said, the discussion should continue. It is not an end to this discussion. Now I want to have the privilege of inviting our last speaker for the morning session, and that is Dr. Gladys Mwende Musuva. She's already with us here physically. I'll give a brief bio of Dr. Gladys Musuva, who holds a doctorate in business administration, finance option from the United States International University, a master's in business administration, again finance option from the United States International University, Africa, a Bachelor of Laws from the University of London, a Diploma in Law from Law Society of Kenya, postgraduate diploma in finance from Birmingham University, and she's a chartered banker from the Chartered Institute of Bankers, London, and a BCom accounting option from the University of Nairobi. She's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, holding current certificate as an advocate from Law Society of Kenya. She is a commissioner of oaths, notary public, again holding current certificate as a notary public, associate of Chartered Institute of Bankers, London, Mediation Training Institute, again USA. There are lots of achievements. Maybe I'll just read one or two. I have been involved in training and mentoring young people on investments, including analysis of financial statements. Adjunct faculty or lecturer at the United States International University, Africa, where I've taught business law, business ethics, and values. I participated, that is her, in the current review of development of CASNEB syllabus in both law and finance. I've been involved in the development of curriculum by KIE in law-related papers. So again, there is lots of achievement, which from Dr. Musuva, which again will be available online for you to read. But that's brief about our next speaker. So Dr. Gladys Mwende Musuva, welcome.
The Vice Chancellor, Chair of the Conference, distinguished guests, delegates, MUA students, ladies and gentlemen. The wealth of a country is embodied in natural resources, which makes up a significant proportion of wealth of most nations, often more than wealth embodied in produced capital, making natural resources management a key aspect of economic development. Many countries have seen significant rises in revenues from natural resources due to the rise in commodity prices. Natural resources as oil, gas, minerals, timber are expected to continue to play a significant role in resource-abundant economies as demand from rapidly growing economies increases, as supplies of non-renewable resources decline, renewable resources harvest approach maximum sustained yield levels. Not surprisingly, countries richly endowed with natural capitals have the potential to derive significant current income from resources. Ladies and gentlemen, economic development, this is the development of economic wealth of countries or regions for the well-being of their inhabitants. It is the process by which a nation improves the economic, political, and social well-being of its people. From a policy perspective, economic development can be defined as efforts that seek to improve well-being and the quality of life for a community by creating better systems. One of it is trade policy, which is a strategy with a set of objectives and tools that government uses to achieve its goals. These are sets of instruments and measures to achieve government objectives. Trade policy reforms as an institutional reform. Trade policy reform occurs in terms of challenges in the levels of tariffs and the quantitative restrictions and the shift in relative prices brought about by these alterations. Hence, trade reform ends up being much more than a change in relative prices. Its result in institutional reform of a major kind. Institutional reforms change not only policy parameters, but also behavioral relationships. Since human resources, administrative capacity, and political capacity are scarce, especially in developing countries, policymakers need to have a good sense of priorities. Trade reform often entails importation of institutions from abroad. Sometimes this is a deliberate policy action to harmonize a country's economic and social institutions with those of trade partners. Ladies and gentlemen, institutional prerequisites for development, price reforms in external trade, product and labor markets, finance, and taxation were the reforms of the 1980s structural adjustments, along with microeconomic stability and privatization. The question begs, can we rely on growth payoff from expenses? Global integration has opportunity cost because of the institutional consequences that such a strategy entails. These costs have been traded over against the expected benefits. The tendency in policy discussions has been to go considerably beyond the standard case of trade and to claim that open trade policies produce significant boosts in economic growth and development. No country has developed successfully by turning its back on international trade and long-term cash flows, capital flows. Very few countries have grown over long periods of time without experiencing an increase in share of foreign trade in international product. In practice, the most compelling mechanism that links trade with growth in developing countries is that imported capital goods are likely to be significantly cheaper than those manufactured at home. Policies that restrict imports of capital equipment raise the price of capital goods at home and thereby reduce the real investment levels are to be reviewed as a desirable prima facie. Exports are important since that is what one purchases imported goods capital equipment with. The appropriate conclusion to draw from the evidence is not that trade protection should be preferred to trade liberalization as a rule, but there is no evidence to show that trade protectionism is systematically associated with higher growth. The point is simply that benefits of trade openness should not be oversold or overlooked. When other worthwhile policy objectives compete with scarce resources and political capital, deep trade and liberalization often does not deserve the high priority. Typically, receives development strategies, and this is a lesson that is of most particular importance in African countries today. A high-quality policy environment is one that sends clear signals to producers and investors, precludes rent-seeking, does not waste economic resources, is consistent with the administrative capabilities of the government, and maintains social peace. Trade policy reforms contribute to economic development insofar as it helps build quality institutions along these lines. The first question that policymakers should ask is not whether the reform will result in a higher volume of trade, render trade regimes more liberal, or increase market access abroad, but whether the reform will improve the quality of institutions at home. Ladies and gentlemen, trade and growth. The terms of trade depend on whether a country is large or small, that is capacity to trade. A small country with large producers of goods, hence large country perception. Terms of trade refer to the number of exports required to buy the same number of imports. Terms of trade use indices in its calculations. A country is less willing to trade, that is, less willing to import. Produce commodities will depress more of the imports, then the terms of trade for this country will be more immunizations, caused to become poor, impoverished, immensurate. A country experiencing growth would be immensurized by the resulting deterioration in terms of trade. What are the conditions of immensurization growth? One is strong bias to growth towards expanding exports, capacity supply increase to impact world prices, intense involvement in trade prior to the growth, price elasticity of foreign demand for countries' goods, Africa, and immensurization growth. One is reliance on one or two products increases chances of immensurization. Individual rationality can add up to the collective irrationality. Government policy, import subsidy vis-a-vis export, government policy for diversification. Ladies and gentlemen, trade facilitation. The comprehensive and integrated approach to reducing the complexity and the cost of trade transaction process and ensuring that all these activities can take place in an efficient, transparent, and predictable manner based on internationally accepted norms, standards, and best practices. Approach to making exports and imports simple and less costly, efficient, and transparent predictable, normally will cause to reduce risks. The need for trade facilitation. One is growth on the volume of trade, declining level of tariffs towards trade liberalization, increased availability of modern technology, international trade concerns, that is excessive documentation, lack of transparency, limited use of modern custom techniques, inadequate transit regimes, lack of coordination and cooperation between customs and other inspecting agencies, inadequate procedures, especially lack of audit-based control and risk assessment techniques. Ladies and gentlemen, trade in services. Services account for 2/3 of the world GDP. That is 75% of commercial services are all that services provided by the country except those provided by the government. There are 4 modes of service supply. Mode 1 would be cross-border supply. Only the services across the border. These are long-distance services that take place through communication. That is through telephone, fax, emails, television, or radios. Mode 2 would be consumption abroad. Consume services while outside the country. Example, travel to access medical, education, tourism, and services abroad. Mode 3 would be establishment of commercial presence in other countries through branches or subsidies. Example, a bank, insurance, and telecommunication. Example, Safaricom firm establish a branch in another country from a foreign country investment. They form a foreign direct investment, FDI. One of the most sweeping examples of FDI in the world today is Chinese initiative known as One Belt, One Road, or BOR. This program, sometimes referred to as Belt and Road Initiative, involves a commitment by China to substantial FDI in a range of infrastructure programs throughout Africa, Asia, and even parts of Europe. I think we have experienced that what China is doing in our country in the road development. And we are part and parcel of it. We know currently, and I'm speaking this now off the cuff, any development in a country, infrastructure is major. So as we talk about leadership, we talk about COVID, we cannot do much without development of infrastructure. And this is one of the models which has been done by China. The program is typically funded by Chinese state-owned enterprises and organizations with deep ties to the Chinese government. Similar programs are undertaken by other nations, international bodies, including Japan, the United States, and the European Union. Mode 4 is the presence of natural persons moved temporarily to supply services, whether self or employed in territory of consumer. Example, workers of multinationals working in Kenya. Mode 3 and 4 are not applicable for balance of trade statistics because in the balance of payments, the procedure is that export credits minus import ends up with the debits in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, trade and employment. Trade expands by a chance of increasing exports and imports. The concern is that developing countries are yet to share the benefits of globalization, that is higher tax rate for growth of output and employment. Another one is job destruction, or whether with job destruction or job creation. Change in technology has led to job destruction. Quality of employment involves other safety conditions. And the impact of trade liberalization and other domestic policies affect employment and economic growth. The concern is that many developing countries suffer deterioration and employment globally. Trade and agricultural resources. Agriculture is lower in developed countries than in developing countries. But agriculture is the most protected sector, referred to as the most distorted sector. Agriculture and food security is a concern for both developed and developing countries. Ladies and gentlemen, Millennium Development Goals. Millennium Development Goals are an integrated set of 8 goals and 18 time-bound targets for extending the benefits of globalization to the world's poor citizens. The 8 goals were agreed to by all the world's countries. The 8 Millennium Development Goals are namely: eradicate extreme poverty, achieve universal primary education, promote gender equality and empowerment, reduce child mortality, improve material wealth, ensure environmental sustainability, and a global partnership for development. Dispute settlement. Trade disputes and trade remedies is used to correct an alleged violation of trade rules. Dispute settlement is governed by the Dispute Settlement Understanding. Its original form was from Marrakech Agreement, that is the establishment of World Trade Organization. The mechanisms helped at securing compliance with covered agreement, preserves the rights and obligations of members of World Trade Organization, and the predictability and security in international trade. The main features in dispute settlement understanding are compulsory jurisdiction. Once decision is made is fixed, detailed procedure and compliance, compliance-driven, quasi-judicial, binding to the parties involved. The question begs, we need trade remedies. One is assist members to achieve justice and fair treatment. 2, to achieve economic stability among countries during inflation and recession period. 3, avoid distortion in the economy. 4, create predictability in the economy. There is need to correct distortion in trade, which has been caused by dumping. And dumping needs to correct distortion. Consumer protection and improving the living standards to control unfair trade practices and safeguards, that is emergency, both temporary, economic measures, action taken by countries in response to serious injury in the result of custom surge. This conference will provide a forum for delegates to exchange ideas and present their research works. In addition, it is an ideal platform for interaction and for them to establish very important networks. I hope that this conference will allow the participants to form productive networks and look forward to fruitful deliberations during the next 2 days. I wish all of you happy and successful conference. But before I finish, I'm aware that we are talking about leadership, and Kenya is a good example of what is happening in the leadership of the world. And my predecessor talked about the impact COVID has had, the impact COVID has had in not only in Kenya but in the world. So what I've talked here basically is international trade. And without international trade, COVID will bring us down. And we need to focus on the way we can trade and still achieve the production of our own countries and economy. We as universities, we have to go ahead and do more research. One of the things, I don't know whether you discovered this with the COVID, which has been positive to my understanding, is we have improved ways of interaction. We were based as universities to coming to classes. Development has gone to the point of virtual training. And I think this is the way to go. With not only with the COVID, but other diseases and other ways of interaction. We are able to interact internationally. Another way which has brought in, COVID has brought to us as leaders is the issue of being conscious about health. Did you know, this is my observation, ladies and gentlemen, with the coming of the COVID and the introduction of masks, we have had less diseases with regard to flu and diseases which have to do with airborne diseases, isn't it? Because masks have been able to reduce. So although we look at COVID negatively, there's a positive bit of it. So we as leaders of tomorrow, of today and tomorrow, we need to think, where can we go? What can we do to improve our production, both nationally and internationally, so that we as leaders will not be curtailed by diseases. Today we have COVID. Tomorrow, you know, I'm told after every 100 years, there is always a pandemic which sweeps. And we are lucky to be within that period. I'm sure we'll not be there for the next 100 years. But one thing I know, we are the shapers of tomorrow. So I'm calling upon you as we discuss to think in terms as leaders, what can we do to reduce the impact of diseases and to improve on our economic growth in terms of trade, because we trade in different ways. One of it is academic. We are benefiting from other countries, and this is one way to grow, and as leaders to think in terms of how can we grow in terms of COVID, post-COVID, and evaluate ourselves. Where did we go wrong and where can we improve? Thank you, ladies, for listening to me, and I wish you well during this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Msuva. She's given us a very detailed presentation on international trade reform policies. And I think off the cup, she's also talked about the need for countries to leverage on infrastructure as a tool for development. I think finally, she talked about, and as African scholars, we really need then to laud the efforts of African Free Trade Continental Agreement, because that's the only way as Africans we can increase intra-Africa trade, which at the moment is only at 2%. So you can see there is all that potential for us as a continent to increase more trade. So thank you very much, Dr. Msuva. Now I'll like to call upon Dr. Naomi Kadula so that she can lead you through the question and answer session, after which we shall have Mr. Daniel Komu, the registrar, with some announcements for what happens next. So welcome.
Okay, good afternoon. Yes, we have come to question and answer section. I'm Dr. Kadula, an expert in education. Let me acknowledge Professor Micheka. You are my respondent in 2017. And not only responding to my questionnaire, you gave me a book to enrich my work. Thank you very much. So we have had a very heavy morning where we have been having presentations and opening speeches from 6 presenters this morning, where we started with the first one from our DVC, Dr. Cheluget, and emphasized the importance of a day like this, academic and dissemination of knowledge to impact on policy. Our VC, Professor Okeo, linked what we are doing today with our community and with our environment. That tripartite way of doing things, so that what we have in academia impacts in our community and impacts in every change of life. And we had our guest speaker, Professor Dr. Odundo, our chair of the council, who could not talk more than talking of the relevancy of what we are doing today as a university, and why we should always be in the right time doing the right thing to impact in our community and also in the globe. Then we had the tour of the whole world in terms of economies and trade, and we were shown the whole world. In fact, those who have not gone out, I'm sure you have been to Hong Kong, you have been to China through Professor Miller's presentation, and we could see what other countries are doing so that they are where they are, and we can compare with where we are. Then we had Dr. Edward, who had talked about the importance of connections. And these connections are usually very important, and they encourage us also to network when we go out. Also the importance of technology and how the universities should be dynamic on their faculty to be able to ravage or to be in the right, to do the right courses for the students and also for themselves, so that we are all interconnected. And then Dr. Musuva, who has taken us through international trade, those who have never done that course, and we have been able to be shown various reforms in trades, liberalization, and trade, is the importance of trade and growth, issue of trade in services, issue of trade and employment, and trade is everything, trade in agriculture. So it's my role as an expert of examination. I want to get feedback from you. So I will request we all stand up for question and answer section. Yeah, we all stand up. So you either ask a question or you just give us something you learned from the 6 presentation we have been having this morning. So if you want to sit very fast, just ask a question from all those presenters, and then or give something you learned this morning. Yes, Daktari? Thank you. Sit down. Another question or feedback? Someone want to sit? Yes. Give Professor to repeat. Use that microphone so that they can hear.
Sometimes adversities like COVID or any other problems can be a big platform for all of us to find out the best practices, and it's really a big opportunity, and we must capitalize such opportunities, because adversities are not always negative. We have to find out the positivities also.
Thank you. And as the questions are coming, the presenters take note of the question you are supposed to respond to. Yes, give to our VC.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kathula, for handling this session. I also want to appreciate the presenters, the keynote speakers that have given us some very, very useful information in relation to today's conference. I have 2 questions. The first one will go to our first keynote speaker, that is Professor Richard Miller. And I want to thank Professor Miller for his very incisive address. I note that Professor Miller dwelt on several examples from China. And my question to Professor Miller, and appreciating the role that is being played by the Chinese in the economic development throughout the world, and in particular in Africa, is that China is giving loans with implied repayment burdens, with the likelihood of forfeiture of collaterals in form of strategic assets, such as ports, airports, and others of African countries that are taking these loans from China. And yet, Africa is strived of capital and therefore desperate to develop its infrastructure to accelerate its economic development and growth. As a scholar in leadership and management, I would want to ask Professor Miller what advice he would give African leaders as a way forward to see how they can leverage on the Chinese loans vis-a-vis to lose, the African countries and government losing their strategic collaterals. My second question goes to, and I want to appreciate my friend Professor Manyibe, who has traveled all the way from the United States of America to come and participate in this conference. That shows the importance that he has given to this conference and to our university, and particular to the theme of the conference. And also I want to appreciate him coming along with Professor Ratemo Micheka, a renowned academician and administrator of universities, having been the first Vice Chancellor of Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, which we can see the success that he left in that university. Where that university is today is a demonstration of his own capability. And of course, I also want to appreciate him as the one of the council members of the Kenya Institute of Management. And Kenya Institute of Management, as we all know, is our sponsor as a university. So I want to welcome Professor Micheka and to feel free in our conference today. Back to my question to Professor Manyibe, is that COVID-19 has brought in a complex side of learning, that is mixing of virtual, in-person, face-to-face, which are both capital and logistical intensive. And how are the leadership in universities in USA and elsewhere that you're aware of coping with this? And as you delved into maybe discussing that with us, what are some of the best practices that we as the Management University of Africa can borrow so that we benefit, and indeed other universities in Africa? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The presenters can sit down so that you can take the questions well. Micheka, you will also sit down. So let us more 3 questions so that we can have feedback. More questions so that we can, yes? Patricia, yes?
My question is to Dr. Musova. I would like to hear her thoughts on what the tripartite relationship...
Dr. Musova, that question is directed to you. Yes, yeah, start again.
The relationship between international trade, growth, and food security, particularly in Kenya. The relationship between international trade, growth, and food security, particularly in Kenya.
Okay, yes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
As well, my question goes to Dr. Musova. We understand as a country, and she informed us that there are different modes of international trade. One of them is in terms of importing labor. Just like, for instance, She gave an example of the Chinese companies that are doing our roads. To add on that, as a country, we've also tried to go the way of capital-intensive investment. Yet we are in a country where unemployment is a crisis. So I would like to ask from her expertise, as a country, are we going the right direction, importing labor and as well as going the capital-intensive investment way, yet we have unemployment as a crisis in a country? Thank you.
Any other? Those? Yes, Dr.
Okay. Another question to Dr. Msuva. She talked about cross-border trade. Maybe my question is the entry of Safaricom to Ethiopian market. Under which mode does it fall, and what are the challenges and the benefits Safaricom is going to accrue from that trade arrangement? So I was asking, under which mode of a cross-border? Is it mode 1, mode 2, or mode 3, or mode 4? And again, what are challenges Safaricom is going to face in the Ethiopian market, and maybe benefits? Thank you.
Thank you. Also on our online, you are also welcome to share your question with us. Just put it on chat. We'll be able to respond to it. Anybody else? Then you can sit down. Okay, sorry. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate all the presenters. The morning we've really learned a lot. My question is going to Dr. Manyibe. Having moved out of our country to our first world, and of course after the COVID experience, how would you advise an institution, and I'm imagining an institution in Kisii or somewhere in the middle of Masai Land, with all these challenges of COVID, and they are also expected to install infrastructure so that they can also be able to reach out to the world. What are the cost-effective measures would you advise these institutions which are coming up so that they can also be able to catch up and also run from these COVID challenges? Thank you.
Thank you. There was another hand which was, from Justa.
Thank you so much, and my name is Justa, and thank you for the opportunity. I really want to appreciate all the presenters this morning. You did it great. Now my question goes to Dr. Manyibe. Yes, what do you think universities should do to encourage students relevant on these challenges so that they can come up with various innovations? Thank you.
Thank you. So we can start to get the feedback. The first question went to Professor Miller. So Professor Miller, if you can hear us, you can respond to the question from Professor Okeo. Professor Miller was online.
Hear me? You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for that that comment and question, Professor Okeo. I think that lessons are learned from what's gone on with soft loans going hard. Soft loans going hard, I think, is one of the things that that we need to go and learn from. So my advice would be to learn from those and make sure that, we had mentioned strategic ports and other things, but farmland is quickly becoming something else. I know that there's Chinese companies in Zambia, for example, with huge tracts of land. These are, but Kenya and all 54 countries in Africa are sovereign states. So they have certainly the rights to be able to do this, to be able to protect their national interests. And I think that, and I've always been an advocate of this, is strengthening the EAC, which has been continuing to grow and become stronger, as well as the AU. When we can start to help each other, I think things get a lot better. Also, playing off different as the world sort of divides up, it's a lot easier to sort of play off one against the other as a way to attract investment and a way to play one against the other. So, for example, the Japanese are very, very interested in taking place of Chinese, but there's also the Americans, the Europeans. So these can easily, I think they, not easily, but there's possibilities to have them play off against each other. The other thing is, as the petrodollar sort of loses its value, this year was the very first year that oil started to be traded in a currency outside of the US dollar. And up until now, this has been a very big strategic part of the American foreign policy. But because of the Ukrainian crisis, you've now got oil being traded in different currencies. So we're going to see currencies sort of being shifted around. And therefore, I think for Kenya and other countries, trying to get a currency, for example, if we can get back to an EAC situation, borrowing money that is not a hard currency versus, say, the Kenyan shilling is critical in order to be able to pay these things back more efficiently. I'll give you an example. Japan today is the most indebted nation in the history of mankind. So Japan has more debt, national debt, we're talking national debt, than any other country ever. But it's yen owed back to, it's all Japanese yen. So they borrow Japanese yen, they have to repay Japanese yen. Americans have been doing this forever as well. They'll never default on their loans. They just print more money, basically, and that's what the Japanese have been doing. So those are things that we can learn from, things that we can be careful of, and having currency baskets and borrowing against currency baskets or hard currencies outside of those are really important. But again, sort of learning from the past and being able to sort of play off against each other, I think is very good. And working together strategically with neighboring countries, but also with some of the newer players that are out there. And I think there's real opportunity, and I'm quite optimistic that there are ways to do this. But again, be very careful of the soft loans turning hard, and because the lessons are there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Miller, for the feedback. I want to welcome Dr. Edward. You have 3 sets of questions. You can come and yes.
So I'll try my best to remember. I hope I remember all of them. But I think, thank you for those wonderful questions. Some of them I might have a few suggestions, and some of them really, I think it's something we can think about as a group. But let me think about what happened in the past and the present. That's a very good question, because for me, the way perhaps I would approach it, in what context? What are we looking at? What happened in the past within the university systems, and what's happening now, and hopefully what might happen in the future. So if I got that question right, in terms of how do we understand what happened in the past, the present, and I think, of course, the future. In terms of COVID-19, for example, and higher education, we can look back and see some of the pandemics or crises or disasters that have happened and see how we responded. The question becomes, did we learn any lessons? Did we use those lessons now? Are we using those lessons now to deal with COVID-19? If we are using those lessons, are they effective? If they are not effective, then what needs to change? So I think history is very important. As you see, especially people who do epidemiologists, those who study diseases, the history of diseases. You remember the 1918, I think, influenza, what happened. And people have looked at what's happening within the COVID-19 and seeing some similarities and differences. Of course, one thing we know is that that time there was no internet. So communication was not as fast as it is today. But also we know that the internet has brought so much confusion. Anybody can go to the internet and say, if you drink this, you will be okay. and there's no way to control about that. But in the past, information was kind of really packaged in a way that people could, you can package information, communicate in the same format, the way you want it, and control that information. Right now, we don't have that kind of control, and I think one of the challenges for today is how do we control misinformation, and how do we make sure that we communicate the right information. So I'm not sure whether I've answered that question, but I think perhaps I'm not sure whether that was directed only to me, but I think other speakers might add to that. The next question was about the virtual versus in-person adjustments that we have had to deal with. I think Professor Washington asked this critical question that everybody is asking. One of them is, of course, the costs associated with any adjustments you make. So universities always must have a system of evaluating what works best for them in that particular context. So you have to think about context. And when I'm talking about context, thinking about the politics of the country. For example, are the universities, politicians willing to allocate resources, for example, to universities to be able to respond? So in the USA, one good thing that happened, I think, is that the country came up with a package to respond to COVID-19 disruptions at different levels of the learning system. Then they targeted people who are called essential workers. I remember at the university we also came up with a pulse on getting COVID relief days. Okay, if your family member became sick, or you became sick, or a son, or some, then you would be as a member of this institution, you will be given leaves called COVID leave days. So this does not take away your other leave days that you have accumulated. This specifically so you can attend to your. I think that was some lesson, one of the best practices, so that you can develop some mechanism specifically for that. Another thing that the university did is, as I said, developing different teams able to advise the administrators what they need to do. So you look at your university system, all the branches of the university system, get readers. For example, you have your deans presented in the, like what we call emergency leadership team. It was composed of deans, of course, faculty senate. When I joined there, I was invited by myself. Then I said, no, I cannot, I can't represent all the faculty senates. Since we have some committees within the Senate, I advised the administration to include some members of different committees I thought were important in helping make a decision. So the university accepted, and they brought in some more faculty members to be part of that decision. Students were part of that decision-making body. We had people in healthcare. So everybody, we made sure that we had all these different groups represented, because we realized that the needs of students maybe in a different department are different from another department. Schools, and then the challenges staff have are different from faculty. Another best practice, I think, was right now we have a Friday, whereby, of course, we have come back to school, but Friday has been declared a virtual day. So you decide to do, that's a day you do. Faculty members don't have to come to school to deliver instruction, so that we can continue utilizing some of the skills that we have. We don't want faculty members to lose those skills they have learned in terms of delivering virtual instruction. We want to maintain them, so that it's the same thing with students. And since the world is moving towards that, we want to make sure that we provide those opportunities. Another thing is that the professional development department, okay, which is responsible for providing trainings to faculty, students. They have these trainings every week, whereby they, for example, they train people on how to use Microsoft packages, IT. If we introduce a new learning management system, then people are trained beforehand, and they are giving feedback. They are different as how to use the online gradebook, attendance, all those. So you make sure that they understand that system. So if they understand that system very well, then the interaction will be good. So there are quite a number of, I think of quite a number of best practices that we've learned. But I also want to talk about investment. The university decided now we have to prioritize investment in technology. So if it was number 3, I can't tell where it was at that particular time, but it became number 1 priority to make sure that people have the technology. Students had technology. If IT support, 24-hour support, so that they can respond if questions are, they can respond. So it's, of course, challenge. Again, we have to contextualize these things, taking into account what's available and how best we can use that. So there are quite a number of that. So I hope a little bit of Professor, I've answered your question. Yes, and the other question was, how would you advise an institution located perhaps in somewhere rural area in Kenya or a place like Kisii, where I come from? So when you say that, I started looking at that picture. So I started thinking, okay, yeah. But I think one thing I've realized is that institutions, however small you are, don't think small, think big. When you start thinking big, you start seeing your capacity, your potential, and then start exploring those potentials. So I would say that this institution, don't see yourself as small. First of all, think big. Langston University, where I come from, and I want to explain a little bit how you can think big, is not a big university. Of course, it's a public university, but it's not a big university. So our department is now almost one of the best when it comes to research in our field. It's one of the best doing the kind of things we do. We compete for grants, federal grants, with universities like Harvard. Like when I was coming here, okay, right now we have a center that was funded by the federal government in 2013 of about $4.4 million for a period of 5 years. So we competed for that, and we got it. And then we competed for it the second round, we got the funding. The other day, we competed for another big one, grant, another center. And as I was coming here, I was informed that we got it. So, and we competed Ivy League universities, this grant. We were competing with them. So, one thing that we say is the mindset. If you think you can work, try, and again, okay, the first time you might not be the best, but continue trying. The more you try, the more you build your capacity. Develop partnership. Another thing is to develop partnerships, okay? So, for example, Kisii University can develop partnerships, and these partnerships really help strengthen the university. But the partnerships, as a capacity building director, one thing I advise the other universities that we are helping is to make sure that those partnerships are meaningful, okay? It's not like a token. You come partner with a university and you get nothing, or you get a few coins. You make sure that when you are discussing and negotiating about partnerships, you are making sure that you get a good piece of that cake, okay? Whether it's in a grant, okay? If I'm writing, for example, I call you and I say I want to write with you a grant. then we have to negotiate how much you're going to get beforehand, okay, to make sure that you get the money you want. This money benefits your institution, because if a faculty member gets money, the institution benefits, students benefit, the community benefits. So these negotiations, sometimes you start small, but the more experience you get, then you can start asking even more. But understand that when you enter into a partnership, it's not a favor, okay? Because sometimes we have that mindset. It's not a favor. Make sure that you negotiate. So in that sense, I think that's important to think about that. But also, university administrators and everybody have to learn a culture. If you develop a culture, like there's this culture of doing more with less. Just think about that. Doing more. How can I use $100 or 1,000 Kenyan shillings to achieve more than what other people might think 1,000 shillings is worth? If you start thinking like that, the way you invest that money is going to be more strategic, and it's going to be more profitable. So universities, small or big, have to start thinking like that. How do I achieve more with less? So those are the few things that I might say, but I'm thinking another thing that you see is the advantage you have. Location is an advantage, okay? How do you use your rural location as an advantage over somebody who is in an urban center? In the USA, there are grants that you get because you are located in a rural area, okay? Or there are some grants that are open. So when they are open and nobody says it's rural, it's what. So when you are writing your grants, make sure that you need to talk about the advantage. Governments have always invested in urban centers. They have forgotten the rural areas. How do you make that case so that you attract investment to the rural areas? So sometimes location is an advantage. Small is an advantage. The same way big can be an advantage. So it's normally how you see yourself. So those are a few examples that I can think in terms of what advice can I help. But always think about, evaluating yourself, looking at the strengths. Always think from a strength-based perspective instead of thinking from a weakness perspective. Then another important question that was asked: what do you think university do to encourage students to be innovative? Was that a question? Yes. Yeah. This is an age of innovation. So that's a very good point and a question. But universities, as I talked about the universal design. How do we design our environments to support talents within that environment, to support aspirations of individuals? So students, as I said, are our customers, and the universities can think to them in that sense. And if you see them as your customers, you're going to invest more. And one way to invest in students is through mentorship. Okay, mentorship. How do you help students get connected to people who have this knowledge that is key to innovation? How do you help students get the kind of networks they need? So I think one of the things you can do is really mentorship, helping students attend conferences like this. So we know conferences are where people, where ideas are born, really. Okay, you come here, you hear something, you go back and think about it, and it becomes big. So I think then there is also some online free forums that you can join with people who have same goals like you. You can find those. There are free courses online offered by many universities that you can take so that you can be prepared to position yourself to get where you want to be. there is also something that you can do by yourself, okay, as a student. Because sometimes I challenge the students to think about what can you do to get where you want to, okay? What can you do? One thing that I've seen is you can start something like what's called community of practices, okay? What's sometimes COPs, community of practices. So you identify a group, and you say, we want to learn about this aspect. And then you invite your friends to join. And then you start talking about that same issue. Then you start getting issues. I've seen students in Kenya who compete in these innovation forums, and they are very successful because they identify a certain area, they work on it, they talk to their relatives, can you help me succeed here? Or maybe a professor who taught you, okay? Can you help me with this, with Triso? Can you connect me? Then you nurture your idea and then bring it to the market. So I think those are a few things. There are so many, and I know so many of us here have even better ideas that we can think about, but those are some of the things that I can think of as of right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those wonderful responses and also eye-opening. I invite Dr. Musova with the 3 sets of questions. And as Musova is addressing those questions, in case you have any more questions, put it in paper. I will pick the paper so that we save on time.
Thank you very much for the good questions you have asked me. That tells me you are listening to my presentation. The first question was, what can we borrow from the relationship between trade and food security? I could talk about what we call opportunity cost of production. Kenya, we have 2 types of economy. It can be either industrial or agricultural. And Kenya falls within the agricultural type of production, whereby we rely on production of food stuff, not industrial. Agriculture relies on rain, and Kenya has suffered immensely with regard to rain. And we are not the only one. I think we have been having what is being called global warming, and has affected a lot of not only Kenya, but the world. As a result, 10,000 bags. This is a shortfall of 10,000 bags. And what does this mean to us? This might call upon us to do importation of food, and this will affect our balance of payment. I'm sure you understand balance of payment is the difference between exports and imports. If we import more than we export, then we have a negative balance of payment. Our country is already at a standstill with regard to our economy. You realize, I'm speaking now off the cuff, that petrol went up yesterday. It is going to have an impact not only on us, including agriculture. Why? We use petrol for the wide-scale production. So Rift Valley is going to be affected with regard to production, cost of production. We were only told about subsidy on fertilizer. I don't know what subsidy will follow in terms of now the real cultivation, because it's going to be greater than, to me, than just fertilizer. I don't know whether I'm communicating effectively. So that is a big challenge for us, and I don't know whether I'm addressing the question who asked the question, that we are going to have a problem with the food security. Kenya is going most likely to import, and the import, I've said, is going to affect our balance of payment. I know, having worked with the central bank works with about 6 months foreign exchange reserves, and with now the shortage we are having, I'm sure you have noticed also our currency has grown weak because of inflation. I am wondering what impact is going to have with our overall economy with likely to have very, very, very bad balance of payment. The second question was importing labor, employment crisis. I attach that to opportunity cost. And this is what I would say. We are dealing with a global economy. And the trade can be pegged to global economy. The world is a global village. We can wake up, we can sleep in Kenya and wake up in US, or wake up in UK, and wake up in different countries. This also applies to labor. Because of the global economy, and because we can use manpower from our local people and overseas, the question would be, what type of labor are we talking about? We have labor which could be associated with universities, whereby we are more academic. We have also labor associated with the technical institutions, and we have what we are calling in Kenya, jua kali. Those are people who have not gone to school, but they are so intelligent that the things they do, I'm sure they beat even Japan and the Western world. It's only the things they do have not been documented. I think it's the high time, to me, Kenya, we thought of documenting things which are done by jua kali. Because we cannot move to the same level of Western people, but I think we can get closer to the Eastern, whom we are told at one time we're at one stage, but one way or other we relaxed. Can I make a comment and say, Kenya has realized the importance of TVET institutions and is paying a lot of attention to the TVET institutions, and the USIU MUA is committed to exploring training people in its environment to benefit our presence. I am aware that we are committed to that. Kenyans are innovative, and MUA is committed to work together to improve, including our people in our environment, to create courses which will enhance their knowledge and production. So we are going to be good producers of manpower, relevant manpower. And I'm not degrading academic. I'm saying bottom up in Kenya will mean that we empower manpower, and from manpower down, upwards we'll be able to move. The third question was about cross-border trade, and the issue was based on Safaricom, its entry to Ethiopia. And I think I was asked, where does it fall? Now, when I talked about the mode, apparently my computer had a problem and we have tried to sort it out. We are not able to sort. I think we fall on two modes, after the four modes I talked about. Mode one was cross-border supply of service. Kenya is supplying service, not only in Ethiopia, but in many parts of the world. You remember we have gone global. It's only sometimes as developing countries, we are not given according to meet the medals we deserve. Kenya has developed. We are international. We are not only in Ethiopia, we are in many other parts of the world. We could also peg this to mode 4, that is the presence of natural persons who have moved temporarily to supply services, whether self or employed in territory of consumption. So we are having people whom we have trained in Kenya, and they are also able to work not only in Kenya and also in Ethiopia, and technology itself is helping us to do what we are doing in Kenya. So I think I would say, like we did on our Tuesday, Kenya we are moving, and we will be able also to train not only in Kenya, but internationally of the things we have learned as we develop. Thank you very much.
Allow me to hold you a bit, Daktari. The question here is also for you, and it is saying, much as we struggle to enhance development in developing countries, corruption has always affected this endeavor. So the question is, why is this corruption so persistent even when policies have been passed to prevent? The second question related to the same is, what could be the best remedy for this?
Corruption. One of the things, and is embedded in our constitution, is people about issue of honesty. And we in Kenya, not only in Kenya, by the way, corruption is all over the world. Let us not think about Kenya. It's all over the world. It's only the multitude of corruption which we may think about. So, the corruption we are going through has to do with the change. And the change has to be positive in our country. And unless we are ready to change, and I'm not talking about Kenya alone, I'm talking all over the world, we will not beat this animal called corruption. There are some principles people have to do, and that is very much dear in the service industry. One is integrity, accountability, transparency, etc. And that is within we have in our governance some of the issues we need to address. So unless we Kenyans, and I'm actually calling upon each one of us to try to embrace on these governance issues. Because unless we change, who is going to change? We must be number one. I'm a lecturer and a communicator. And allow me to use a very simple communication tool. When I point at you, I'm pointing with you with 2 fingers, and I'm pointing myself with 3 fingers. You can never point at somebody this way, neither can you point at somebody this way. You always point somebody on 2 fingers. It's just equivalent to the Bible. You see people's specs, you forget about the log in your own eye. So if we have to change, I'm trying to say it must start with you. You must be contributor number 1 to the change. And although we have in Kenya a new government, seriously the government, unless we will not change you, unless you are ready to change. So I'm calling on us and all Kenyans to be ready to change, and to change positively, and the change will start with the leaders. And this forum is about leadership. Can we practice what we say? So the best remedy, I think I've answered you, is for us to be first signals of change. And if we start, and I'm going again to, because this is what we are, bottom up. If we start changing from down, we'll trickle it up. Of course, the best change would be from up, because that's where corruption is in Kenya. And I don't want to dwell with that, because I'm not authorized to talk some of these things. I need clearance, isn't it? So corruption is actually right now very high in the higher levels. But if they cannot implement change, bottom up we can change. Who takes the bribery? Who takes the kitu kidogo? It is us, isn't it? If we started by in our own offices, in our own small way, working and not demanding kitu kidogo, we will be able to change. And one of the things I think will change is religion's teaching about the importance of stopping corruption. Whether you are Christians, Kenya is thought to be 80% Christians, but I'm very dear to other people. We have Islams. They are the most people who don't like corruption, if I was to say. When you talk of Muslims, I've dealt with curriculums to do with the Muslims. That's why they don't talk about profit. They don't talk about, they talk about sharing what you earn.
Kenyans don't like sharing what you earn. You like having it all in your pocket. You know that? My friend will tell you what I'm talking about. That is very, very important, people, to share our income, our resources. We don't become just selfish. Kenya needs to change from being selfish, ladies and gentlemen. And they know that we have to take care of our brothers and sisters. We know about unemployment. I've talked about unemployment. One of the things will change unemployment is people to be willing to work and not choose work. One of the things we have in problem in countries is choosing work. Then you start choosing, then next thing you start choosing what to eat. How can you choose work? Eat what to eat when you don't work. We must be engines of work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Musova, for those wonderful feedbacks. We are pressed of time, but in case we have more burning questions, we can have them. Any more question? Then I welcome Miss, this one? Okay. So I welcome Como for the next section.
So all protocols observed. I would want to start by inviting the Vice Chancellor, Professor Washington Okeo, who has an announcement, and then I'll continue the announcements.
Thank you very much, Mr. Komu. I'm sure that we have sat down for a long while, and we must be feeling some aches in our necks, in our eyes, in our backs. So I request that we all stand up and stretch a little bit. Just stretch your arms and also play around with your necks like this, because they must be feeling strained. Huh? Okay? I will not ask you to kick because you may hurt your neighbor. Thank you very much. We may resume our seats. As we draw nearer to the morning session, I want to say that we have amongst us, we are honored to have amongst us a very senior academician, not only in this country, but in the whole world. And we are very proud of him. We are proud to have amongst us Professor Atemo Micheka had announced his being around earlier on. He's one of the Kenya's great academicians. Professor Micheka is a fellow honorary secretary of Kenya National Academy of Sciences and is currently the chair of the chairman of the Kenyatta University Council. We all know that Professor Atemo is the founding Vice Chancellor of Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, where he served for a whopping 13 years. And indeed, the progress that we are seeing in JECWA today, we owe it to him. Professor Micheka is also a distinguished scholar and recipient of many, many awards. If you look at his bio, you'll see them. And he is a professor, more importantly, of weed science and environment. And being a professor of environment, is a very strong advocate of environmental conservation. Indeed, he has held several national duties, responsibilities, including being director of NEMA. And academically, Professor Atemo is a well-published scholar with over 3 books to his credit and several academic papers. And he's telling me not to go on and on, because otherwise we'll just take the whole day appreciating him. I want to welcome Professor Micheka to please come and share with us a few of his experiences, because we are very honored to have him in this conference. So if he can make a few remarks, we'll be very, very happy. Please join me in welcoming Professor Micheka to the conference. Prof. Karibu sana. Thank you very much.
Really, I think my Vice Chancellor, really, I think actually I was not in the program to really say anything this morning, this afternoon now. I know you're going for lunch. It's just about 1:05. But, sir, really, thank you so much for your honoring me to come and just say one or two words. And the colleagues who are here, virtual, I've seen others from international countries, West, East. Daktari, thank you so much for giving such a remarkable interaction between your university in Oklahoma and a university here in Kenya, which is almost situated in similar conditions, but yours is a little, the soil is a little better than these ones. But thank you so, so much. Prof, really, mine is really to say this. Madam Mumo, thank you for legal interpretations on trade. Really, you gave us enough time to listen, enough time for students to ask questions, and enough time for colleagues, staff to actually go through. And I like the way she said, stand up and ask a question. If you don't have any, sit down. And I saw questions flowing up. Thank you, Mwalim Asante. Just a few things, I'll not take long at all. One, really, thank you much, Mwalim, for the facilities. Actually, it's my first time to be here. I know the campus in South Sea. And when I was coming here, I had to follow quite a ride. I saw 100 kilometers to Namanga. I thought I was heading to Arusha, our next country. Thank you so much, really. And I pray that as soon as possible, you will be getting, I hope, your charter. The conference has really been an eye-opener, a big one. And I saw facilities here, which I envy. They are nice, beautiful, big areas in a fairly semi-dry land area, Eco-Zone 4, Ecological Zone 4, there about 5, with a lot of limited water. But I went and shook some tight pipes and got some water actually running. I thought I could get any. Let me say this, nice conference. After COVID, what next? I want to remind you really quickly, Vice Chancellor, having listened to all of the discussion this morning, most of, especially the two last ones, when I came in, I apologize. Let me correct one thing. I think my CV, now I finished being the chairman of Kenyatta University Council sometimes back. I have to deal with that. Now I'm the chairman of National Research Fund, which I want to encourage you, the university here, Management University, to start actually applying for funds when you see the announcements. So I'm now the chairman there, but I shall not favor you beyond, say, University of Eldoret or university in the Kem, someplace. So that's an announcement. Hence, I've been so busy really, and I did relinquish my membership as a council of KIM, but I'm a member number 334 of Kenya Institute Management, which runs every Thursdays for conferences. But right now, the chair of National Research Fund, which controls about 3-4 billion, quite a bit of substantial money under the GDP. So really, I'll make those corrections. But I'm the chairman of Kenya National Academy of Sciences. Really. So when I was seated down, I took notes. You see, if I would have, now afterthought, I would have said post-COVID management, with what you said, through, for Kenya here, low-hanging fruits, low-hanging innovations. The incoming president took one of the lowest, nice, hanging activity, bring in the judges who were refused. It's legitimate. He brought them in, a low-hanging fruit. Let me tell you why. Think about it. Number one, after COVID, in fact, I was telling my learned friend there that I got a bit of it, scared. My wife got it, but we didn't know. And Sustainable Development Goal number 19, the Sustainable Development Goals 8, 17, and then MDGs, you know them. She went through them, the 8. They were just change of words to create 17 from the 8, which we are not using. So really, what do we do? Hygiene, clean air, environmental conservation, plant more trees. Is only oxygen you needed to live. How do you publish it? How do you push it? How do you explain everybody? Child, a leaf, oxygen. Oxygen, a leaf. Psychological hang-ups on that. Then, new foods came through. A lot of foods that were actually brought through. You asked a very nice question. What can students do in view of what we have gone through? You are a university of management. Can you manage our environment? Can you manage our depletion? Can you manage the loss of some of the species and traditions on various foods? Every document and every drug, every liquid, even dawa, which we now have costing 200 shillings in Sarit, where I sometimes go, nobody, Prof, has refuted that any of those did not heal COVID. In fact, everything that came to market healed COVID. Why don't you capitalize on 10 of them? Management University, popularize them, bring them into bear, say, Management University wishes to advance and advise that dawa is one of the best to drink from world all over the place. So I'm not going to make an extra lecture, but I'm simply telling you a low-hanging fruit which you can pick and run with it. Quite a number of them. I say foods, comparative healing. Pick something from China, US, Canada, that healed. You saw people die, actually, literally. And there were debates and arguments that why aren't the, in quotes, Africans falling down like flies like in other countries? Just find out. Death became just an issue. So indigenous, traditional, ecosystems, conservation, and the threat, the most important here, Prof, pick this. There is a DVC research. This is a nasal area, and I do know the importance of conservation of what is being lost. You can use this as study area. It's actually a very, very complex place. I thought I was heading to Garissa, University of Garissa, close to. You can do certain things beyond what, you asked that question, Dr. Manyibe. What can you do in such an environment besides what University of Nairobi, where I'm Professor Emeritus, actually I've retired. What can you do different? I'm just finishing. The negative part of this is this, to teach us. Death is useless. You can die any minute. You just go negative, deaths, costly, and no meaning in life. COVID taught us that, made us even brave, that you see somebody die, you say, hallelujah, too bad, next could actually be you. So what did that teach us? The other one is that post-COVID-19 put us together worldwide. Even those countries that thought we would, actually people thought the African continent, people would just go like this, like that, like that. We survived, and those are the issues. Pick what survived, say, more is now talking about the best of those that made us survive. Necessity is the mother of innovation. Necessity, really. You came here, saw the dry weather, I saw the road, complex. Sooner or later, next time I come, probably it will have cable from all the way down this way. Necessity, you'll say this dust is too much for me. You get somebody, get Saudi Arabia, where they are taking our people. Get them, tell them Saudi Arabia, assist us. They live in a similar place like this. Mine again is to thank you all, wish you the best. Thanks for the invitation through. I couldn't actually have come. It's one of the best find. I've been to his university and I gave a talk there, again to a large group of students those days in Oklahoma. A very beautiful, they have several campuses all over. And I stayed there for like 2 weeks or some 2 weeks. So please, can you now strengthen the linkages here? Pick one. This is your place. Pick it more. Be a more promoter outside and let more promote you internally. So the next time you bring a friend, it's Washington Moore. Washington, there is a man, a gentleman there I met, Moore, M-O-O-R-E. Tell him, they came once, then we had a conference in multimedia. Now you can actually organize, you are our link. These people here are your brothers and sisters and uncles and cousins. So whatever you do is an advantage to your name It's a win-win situation. You win, they win. More wins, 10 students win. The VC wins, he stays a little longer working. You win, you stay longer working. I thank you all and wish you the very best stay. Thank you.
Okay, let's give Professor Ratemo a better clap. Okay, thanks a lot. I have 4 announcements to make. We are breaking. I don't want to say breaking for lunch because I know we have international participants who may not be going for lunch, but we are taking a break. For us Kenyans and for us who are here, we are going for lunch up to 2 p.m. And when we say 2, it is not at 2, but by 2. So at 2, we are going to break into our rooms for the breakaway sessions. And to avoid any confusion, ensure that you know your moderator. But I'll tell you the rooms that you are going to go to. Rooms 1 and 4. Groups 1 and 4, sorry. Groups 1 and 4, you'll be in this hall. The moderator is Dr. Mashoka. Group 2, Group 3, Group 5 and 6, your rooms are labeled. They are along that building. You'll get the rooms labeled. For those who are in the virtual, who are attending the meeting virtually, you are going to be allocated the rooms by Professor Rishi Zane. So I know he's listening. So immediately you get there, you are going to be allocated, you log in. The login credentials have been given. So you'll see the room that you'll be allocated. One of the things every moderator must do is to log in. And once you have logged in, you'll ensure that every presenter also logs in, because you'll be presenting for the people in those rooms as well as those who are in other parts of the world. Dorothy, I think I need some clarification. I saw you. Dorothy? So once we are through with the presentations at 4, then we'll break away and then we meet tomorrow. I just want to make the final announcement for our biological needs. The first block, that side is men, this side is ladies. The second block here, it is the gentlemen and then the ladies. And then that block, it is the ladies and then the gentlemen. So every block has a ladies and a gents place. So at this particular time, I would want to welcome our VC for the final statement before we break for lunch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel Komu. There's a ceremony that we were scheduled to have later on in the afternoon, but we think that despite us being a little bit late, we do it now. It is best done now than in the afternoon. We want to appreciate a few of our invited speakers who did the keynote speaking. And this is the time when I want us to go through that very quickly, so that once we break off for the presentations in the afternoon, then we don't have to hold them. They can leave then at their own leisure. So let me have the gifts. We'll start with the one who has come from the farthest. And you know the one who has come from the farthest. The United States is about how many kilometers away from here? About, is it 13,000? Some more than 13,000 kilometers away from here. We welcome Professor Manyibe, who was one of our keynote speakers and gave us a very interesting discussion, a comparative analysis of what happens the world over, particularly in the US, with regard to COVID-19 situation. So, Professor Manyibe, congratulations.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are honored to have you as one of our guests.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Musuva, who is one of our council members, who kindly agreed to also be one of our keynote speakers this morning. We highly appreciate your contribution to the university as a council member, and importantly, sparing time to come all the way to come and attend this conference. And we want to appreciate you, Daktari. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Next, another guest speaker, keynote speaker, who has also traveled several miles or kilometers all the way from India. He can speak to us a few words in the Hindu. This is Professor Jyoti, a visiting professor of this university.
You want to get rid of me today only? Thank you.
Welcome. We appreciate you.
Thank you
very much. Last but not least, our senior academician who was just given us the last keynote address, Professor Micheka. Yes, you are not in the program. We are appreciating people who have made a change, and you have made some serious contribution. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your comments, for your remarks. Thank you. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Komu. We are now through with the formalities. And as Mr. Komu announced, let us break off now. In the afternoon, it will be the breakaway sessions. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Being an environmentalist, we do not want to challenge what Professor Micheka has advised. Thank you very much. We shall consider that. So let us take a break, and then we resume at 2 o'clock. There will be breakaway sessions, as has been announced by our MOCs. Thank you very much for sitting through up to now. It is about 1:30 p.m.